Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. Okay, so I just want to welcome you to this PTSO Parent Ed event. It's called Untangling the College App Process. And before we get started, just a few things. If you could turn off your cell phones, put them on vibrate, that would be great. Also, we're having a Q&A afterwards. That's what those little pieces of paper are all about if you have any questions. And we'll be handing these little index cards out to you afterwards if you have any questions you want to ask our speakers. That's what that's all about. And just notice where the exit doors are, and the bathrooms are in the foyer area. So we have a really exciting evening planned for you tonight. We have two keynote speakers to help with the college app process. We have Dr. Felicia Fahey, a very informative college counselor from Palo Alto, and George Fan, who is CEO of College Kickstart, which is a really pretty amazing, very insightful, data-driven college app. This is a PTSO-sponsored event, as you know, and so before we kind of begin our whole evening, I'd like to introduce you to our PTSO president, Sandy Wu, who will speak briefly about PTSO.
Good evening. My name is Sandy Wu. I'm the PTSO president. Parent-teacher student organization supports non-staffing needs at Saratoga High School. This year, PTSO has a goal of raising over $100,000 in donated funds. Your tax deductible donation supports curriculum enhancement through purchase of technologies and classroom materials, encouraging innovative teaching and learning. PTSO funds books and equipment in college and career center, speakers for parent education, staff appreciation luncheon, community building events, and scholarships for seniors. Your generous donation will help our high school to sustain these crucial programs such as college and career center, Saratoga High School newspaper, library purchases, and orientation for incoming freshmen. Please consider donate to PTSO by going to the Saratoga High School website, click on the PTSO tab, and you can donate online using your credit card or PayPal account. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Sandy. So I just want to remind you about a few little things that are going on at Saratoga High School. For example, Senior Guidance Night is an evening full of very valuable information you're going to want to come to. It's led by Brian Safine, head of our guidance. It'll be at McAfee. And then we also have a lot of resources for you to see that's right on our Saratoga High School website. And these are links. Many of them were just updated to help you navigate through the process of helping your students select colleges and keeping you abreast of all the different deadlines and requirements. These are very informative when selecting the right college for your student. And Mary Eschen, who is my Parent Ed co-chair, is going to be letting you know about all that. And Joanne McKeever, I just want to thank Joanne tonight for printing out. We have tips for the college-bound student is outside as well. And I want to introduce you now to Mary Eschen.
Okay, the main goal of this part of the event is for all of you to look at the yellow sheets that you have. On the one side of the yellow sheet, it turns out that there's a lot of information on the guidance website that I myself, who have a senior, didn't even know about. And on the website, I want to just kind of guide you through where on the guidance website it is. It is a little bit buried. And so on the screen is what the screenshots look like. And we, on this yellow paper, it doesn't look like the blue and, red, white, and blue theme. But on the main page of the website, you would go to guidance when you get to the Saratoga High, the SaratogaHigh.org page. And then once you go to the guidance page, see my really big arrow there? It's a little nit on the college planning list over there. You probably can't even read it very well from the back, but The URL is at the very top of the yellow page if you really want to type it in, if you can't find it any other way. But there's a college planning part of the guidance website, and you want to go to that. And one of the tabs is for SHS College Application, what does it say? Information. And that's where you want to go to look at the next page, which is what I printed out here for you, what we printed out here for you. But there is a private college application workshop. It is fabulous. They actually have all the guidance slides from last spring's presentation, and the counselors went and did voiceovers for every slide. So if you have any questions about the things that were thrown at you last spring, or if you didn't have a chance to go to that, it is a great presentation. I didn't even know it was up until a week ago. It's been there and I didn't know it. There's information about sending your scores, your child sending scores to their colleges, and the one that is the key that I had to read this was how to use Naviance and the Common App together. How do you tie them together? It's actually down at the bottom. It says files. It's just a list of files on your sheet right down here. That's really critical, and your kids are going to be learning about it in the tutorial tomorrow. If they're applying to private colleges, they should go to that if they haven't been to a white packet or a college packet presentation before. But they're going to have to figure out how to hook up their Common App to Naviance, and it'll tell them in that file, in that PDF. The other thing that's on here is the SHS Alumni College Testimonials that you were seeing as you walked in. This is the 55 videos. This was a preview of what the 55 videos have in them. And I was sort of jumping through them. They actually go not only why did a student choose a certain university, but what do they like about it? What do they dislike about it? What is it like to live in the dorms or on campus? What's the food like? What's the college spirit like at the college? Are there activities for them to do? And even information on how do you get there. If you're on an East Coast school, what flights do you take? How long does it take? If you're on a West Coast school, how long, do you drive to UCLA or do you fly or whatever? All sorts of really interesting information that as your children, as the students are looking at different colleges, there's 55 of them available this year, and hopefully with your donations to PTSO, if you haven't joined, please do so. We can put up more different college videos and collect more so that it's a resource that is a constantly growing body of information for you all to use. But please look at, if you have questions, especially if you haven't seen any of the presentations, this thing at the bottom, it's called the Mega College Presentation, the one with the voiceover. It's really great. On the other side of the yellow sheet is all sorts of dates for college presentations. Dory had mentioned the senior guidance night on September the 8th, but there's a workshop tomorrow for students that are interested in going to private colleges. It's really important. There are packets due on September 15th, and the packets, just so you know, require a parent letter. You have to write a letter about your child, and so you should know about it now so you can write it. I just wrote mine for my son today, did my first version. We have a PTSO meeting where we're having a developer from UProsby. He's the founder of UProsby, and he is at the University of Chicago. He was on Shark Tank. He has made this app. He is going to come to PTSO next week, and he is going to present this great app for hooking up prospects who want to see certain colleges. It's sort of like an in-person interview. It's very interesting technology, and he'll be here. So anyway, there's some other stuff on that sheet that you can see, other useful resources, and I hope you like the rest of this presentation. Thanks.
Now back by popular demand, we have our expert Bay Area College consultant, Dr. Felicia Fahey. Please welcome Dr. Fahey.
So I'd like to thank, I'm getting used to this microphone, I'd like to thank Dory and Mary and Sandy for bringing me back here. It's really fun to be in this auditorium. I feel like I'm going to do a TED Talk. I've been in the library the last couple years. Anyway, my expertise is really started in the college essay. I work on all aspects of the college application process, but that will be what I'm going to present on today. Let's see, I need to get a little tech help. How do we switch off this computer onto this one? Okay, oh, right there. Okay, very good. So I'm going to be going over, sort of giving you an overview of what to expect in terms of the production of essays in the college application process. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what schools actually require essays and how many essays, what to expect in terms of prompts. And those of you that are applying this year, you'll see the prompts. They're actually on this piece of paper here as well. I'm going to go through those pretty quickly and then talk a little bit about supplement questions. I have some writing tips. There's some here. The ones that I'm telling on this slide may be slightly different. I kind of like to provide as many ideas out there, throw as many ideas out there as I can. And then we'll talk a little bit, I'll talk about staying organized and how you can do that. I'll mainly be reviewing how I stay organized. I use Google Docs and Google Calendar, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I see parents using in their work with me and with the documents that I use. And then the final piece is just sort of how to have fun in this process and how to get inspired. It can feel like drudgery a lot of the time, but I do think that you can turn it into a really meaningful process that helps students really understand who they are and what they want and where they're going. So just to get started, students generally are applying to all kinds of colleges. So they're applying to out-of-state state colleges, they're applying to in-state state colleges. So this gives you an overview of what you can expect in the essay category. First of all, the CSU and community colleges, you do not have to write an essay for those applications. The community colleges, you apply quite late, register in the spring or in the summer. CSU, your application will be due they open in October, and you should get them in generally before November. I'm going to go over those deadlines in a little bit. The UC requires 2 personal statements. You can see the questions on this sheet. They have not changed. We're going to take a look at those also. They also ask for an additional statement, and this is sort of a box that a lot of students don't know what to do with because it says optional. In my opinion, you should always answer an optional essay prompt. Especially if they're asking you questions like, why do you want to come to our college? It's not optional. You answer it, definitely. So that's just a sort of a piece of wisdom in terms of doing these applications. Just to give you an anecdote, I had a student last year who applied to Tulane. It was her safety school. She was totally overqualified. And it was, she did not answer the why do you want to come to Tulane, and she was not admitted. And when her father called up and had a long conversation, it turned out that it was the fact that she hadn't answered that question. It kind of came up in the conversation in an awkward way because if they say it's optional, they can't really hold that against you, but it turned out that was sort of the reason that they felt that she wasn't showing demonstrated interest. So definitely answer optional questions. For the additional statement, what you can put in there for the UCs is if there's something that you've dedicated a lot of time to, whether it's something in engineering, for example, like if you're applying to engineering, Cal likes to know that you're applying to engineering and they like you to address that in an essay somewhere. If you feel like it really does not fit into your personal statements, this would be a good place to talk about your interest in engineering because none of the other UCs ask for that kind of a statement. But it's also a place that if you've been sick as a student or you've had a sick parent or something happened to you that just put you back in terms of your studies and you felt like you had a blip in your transcript, this is a great place to explain that. So the additional statement is really important. They have it in the UC and state applications for that purpose specifically to find out if students need to explain that why they feel that they didn't perform to their capability. And that's really what it's used for. But people now use it for other things, like to say why an extracurricular activity or a job has been very important to them, or how they've committed their time in a way that they feel the activity list just doesn't do justice to. For the common application, and that additional statement on the UC application is very short. You get 250 words, I think. On the common application, you have one personal statement. We're going to take a look at at those prompts. They're also on the handout. You also have the option to provide an additional statement of 650 words. So this is also a place where, again, if you have something really significant to share that you think really reflects who you are, especially if it's sort of about academics or about a project that you want to do, but you don't necessarily want to write your personal statement on that because you want to explore more of who you are as a person in your personal statement, then this is a good place to add that. So I have students often write about, again, their extracurricular, their their journalism. They can provide their sort of a resume, a list of different things that they've published or projects they've worked on. If you've had a job and you feel it's really important to talk about the importance of that job, that's a good place. You can tell a story with 650 words if you feel that that's important. But that's really kind of a wild card in the Common App, and you can use it to really feel that you're providing the most full depiction of who you are. For every private or state school on the Common App, not every single school, schools like Northeastern actually and Wash U do not have supplement essays this year, but most schools do, and they have between 2 and 4 supplement essays. So if you start to do the math on this, if you're applying to 10 colleges that do ask for essays and they each ask for 4, you're writing 40 short essays over the course of 3 months. So it's quite a bit to do. I organize students with a Google Calendar, and I'll talk about that when we get to that slide. For out-of-state colleges that are not on the Common App, Elon University, Tulane University, out-of-state schools, MIT is not on the Common App. Many out-of-state schools are not on the Common App, so you have a different application to fill out there. And most of those applications, University of Washington has 1 long essay, and then they have a couple short supplemental essays. And that's the case of MIT as well. They have sort of a longer personal statement of 500 words, and then they have several short answer questions of 250. So it's kind of a mix what you're going to get per school, but more or less you're looking at writing 1 long statement and 2 to 4 essays per college. The prompts for the UCs have stayed the same for years. They have not changed them. I'm always surprised, but who knows when they're going to change. The first one is really a question of culture. Describe the world you come from. It's almost an anthropological question. And they really want to know who are the people in your life or the culture in your life, the area that you grew up in. How has that shaped who you are? Or what community, what sub-community that you belong to, how has that community shaped your dreams and aspirations? So they're really getting here at how have people influenced you in your life? And the second part of that question, how have they shaped your dreams and aspirations, is really getting at who do you want to be? Not necessarily what do you want to do when you grow up, but who do you want to be? What's important to you? So you can explore that in sort of a variety of ways. The second question, tell us about a personal quality, talent, accomplishment, contribution that's important to you. That's a pretty wide open question, and as you'll see when you look at the Common App questions, you can double this up for the first question. It could even, actually for the first 4 questions, you could double up this question for that question. The first question, you can actually double that up for the 5th question on the Common App, so we're going to take a look at that now. So I really believe in helping students to repurpose their essays. I think asking them to write 3 really fantastic essays in this process is too much, so I really ask them to repurpose those essays, and sometimes they end up putting one of their UC essays in their additional statement. For example, their UC essay about the culture that they come from. They think it's really important for people to understand their background and their cultural affiliation, so they put that in the additional statement. The 4 questions, these questions have been, I've kind of shortened them for this slide. You have the full question on your handout. But the first question, some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that's so meaningful that they believe that their application would be incomplete without it. So you can see the overlap here with the UC number 2 question. So this is really, pretty much every student can write this essay. I mean, there's something about every single student that they could say, you won't really get me and understand me unless you know this story about me. And I kind of love those stories because who the student is, sort of what they bump up against or what makes them shine is really particular to who they are. And they always have one specific story or 2 specific stories about that. Recount an incident or time when you experienced failure. How did it affect you and what did you learn from the experience? This can be a tricky question because you want to come out in a positive light. So even if it didn't go well and you failed and it was just sort of what you were left over with was the lesson, you just need to emphasize the lesson and the fact that you're growing from it. And I think this is a question that students are feeling increasingly more comfortable to talk about, because I think our culture is changing, and we're in a culture now where everybody really realizes that failure is really, really critical to doing well, that you actually learn more from failure than you do from doing things well and getting it right. So I'm really heartened to see that. Reflect on a time that you challenged a belief or idea. This is often for the students that are in debate or they're into politics. This usually fits a certain student. I wouldn't say it's super common that students are really outspoken and they kind of want to stand up and defy something. But sometimes it's even somebody in their community that says, oh, well, you can't do that because of X, Y, Z. And this kind of inspires them to really take on some project or prove to this person that they can do it. So it can be a more personal issue, but it can also be sort of a political issue or a belief or a value that a student is challenging. This question's been really revamped, and I really love the way that they've done it. And by the way, they've done this by taking in student input. So the questions are a lot better this year than they were in prior years. Describe a problem you've solved or a problem you'd like to solve. So that's really cool because it allows you to imagine a problem. It can be an intellectual challenge, a research query, an ethical dilemma. Explain its significance to you and what steps you took or could take to identify a solution. So this is great for engineers, but it's also good for students that are doing social service or they want to be entrepreneurs or whatever. It's great for creatives, and it's also good for kind of logical thinkers and mathematicians. The final one matches up really well with the UC number 1. Discuss an accomplishment, event, formal or informal, that marked your transition from childhood to adulthood within your culture, community, or family. So oftentimes students are able to repurpose that essay. Again, this essay is 650 words, and on the UC essays, you need to total 1,000. So I usually tell students, write one that's 650 and reuse that for the Common App, and then write another one that's 350 words. And if you feel that that's a good statement for your additional statement, then you can use that. Supplement essays can be really tricky. I'm going to give you a range of supplement essay topic or questions here. One of the most common, this used to be on the Common App and they took it out, elaborate on one of your extracurricular activities. So Duke, USC, and UMich have all put it back into their applications. They like that question. They didn't want to see it disappear. Why are you applying to our college is the most commonly asked question, and students are generally kind of not so clear about how they're supposed to answer it. You want to encourage your students, those of you that are here, you want to look at the mission statement, you want to look at programs, you want to look at the departments that interest you and the courses that you might take, the student activities and clubs that you might participate in. And the way that I suggest that you do that is to kind of assume the mindset that you're actually going to that college next week. You're going to start classes there next week and you need to figure it out. What I generally find is that this whole application process kind of puts blinders up for students, and it's very difficult for them to connect with the college because there's a lot of anxiety about whether they're going to get in, and they have to fill out this application and write these essays, and it's really overwhelming. So if you imagine that you're going there and that you have to show up next week and you're going to take classes and you're going to meet this professor and you're going to go check out this club, then it becomes more real, and there's less of sort of this obstacle between you and the school. So that's sort of what I recommend, that the mindset that you use. I'm just going to skip over these. Describe your academic interests. How will you pursue them? Super common. USC, Purdue, the large research institutes generally ask that question. Describe an unusual way in which you have fun. So both Caltech and MIT ask these kinds of questions. If you had 5K, how would you use it to design your own project? Not uncommon of schools that have a very strong service mission. So Jesuit and Catholic and Christian schools often are kind of asking service-based questions. And then University of Chicago has the quirkiest questions on the block. Art is either plagiarism or revolution. Paul Gauguin, what is your art, and is it plagiarism or revolution? These are really hard philosophical questions, and you can thank your students at University of Chicago. They're the ones that actually create those questions every year. They're usually really tricky, and they require philosophical thinking and kind of critical thinking and playful thinking. If you have trouble with these questions, then you should seriously think about whether University of Chicago is the right fit. And I would say that for all of the schools. The questions that they ask in the supplement actually reveal who they are and what, how serious they are about creativity, how serious they are about logistics and practicality. So you can get or research, for example. So you can get a very strong sense of a school through their supplement questions. These are my tips. I think my strongest message to students is that their essay is not outside of themselves. Outside of them. They spend a lot of time trying to come up with the perfect essay and the perfect essay answer, and sometimes they work themselves into a total block where it's very hard to even get started and they're kind of sitting in front of a white page. So what I say is, you'll get there to the thing that you really want to write about, but just start brainstorming the experiences you've had and answering these questions, because every student can answer these questions. And if you just start the process of writing things down and brainstorming, what do you consider qualities that you really like in yourself? What have been the most important life experiences that you've had? And then you can play around with different exercises, like what are the metaphors, what are metaphors that would best capture this experience? And what would be a great first sentence for this experience? Or what are the 3 things that are really important about this experience? And you can just play around with your ideas first and really move forward. I highly recommend avoiding any topic or story that someone can tell. So I always say, if 2 people or 1 person could write the same sentence or write the same essay, then you're not onto something original that's really unique to you. So stories about sports, unless you can really drill in on something really, really specific, and I'm not talking about an injury because many students have had injuries, but your relationship with a particular item that you wore, for example, in a race or something like that, or the way that you challenged yourself to meet your goals in a very specific way. Maybe you had your own metaphors or you had your own system for figuring out how you were going to get from one level to the next. It has to be really personal. The story, if it's about sports or travel or service projects, you really got to drill in on details that are really, really specific to your experience, or you're going to lose your reader, because they get hundreds of these and their eyes literally roll back in their head on the first sentence as soon as they realize that they're going to read an essay that they've read 100 times. They almost can't read it. It's like a knee-jerk response. So be really careful with that. Make sure that you're really drilling in on details. One way that I also like to talk about it is don't tell the trailer, don't focus on the trailer, focus on a snapshot. So one specific moment, and then really focus on that moment and drill into the details. So if you look at these Common App questions, and this is something that I just kind of came because I just broke my toe, and so I realized that I kind of bumped into myself. And that's sort of been in my head for the last week. And when I looked over the Common App questions again, because I look over them every single day, I realized that in a way they're asking students, how do you bump into yourself? So when are you aware of who you are? Right? In great moments, in moments of difficulty, in moments when you're being challenged, you feel that, you know that you're running into yourself. And so what are those moments and what happens in those moments and how are you growing from those moments? That's really sort of an overview of what they're asking in these essay questions. Telling a story is really useful. It's our oldest form, really, of relating to one another. And if you speak to anybody that's a CEO or tries to sell their company, or anybody that's trying to support companies or deals in marketing, they all tell you that a good story is gold. So if you can, use storytelling elements, that's really useful, and I think it's really compelling. Being concise is really important. Who you are comes through in your choice of words. So your poetry, if you will, comes through in the words that you choose in your essay. And everybody chooses different words. This is what I love about the work I do, is that I get to see how every student has a different metaphor and a different way of thinking about things and different verbs. So if you really work on that aspect of paying attention to the words you're using, your essay will become more and more you and more original and more in your own voice. Writing is communication, so the other thing that you want to be asking yourself is not only what do I want to tell admissions about myself, but what do I want admissions to feel when they read my essay. So keep asking that question. If your essay is starting to get kind of tight, or if it's getting kind of heavy or negative, if somebody reads it and they kind of have a feeling like they're not connecting with you, that you're kind of pushing them away, you need to really pay attention to that. So, writing is communication, and it communicates feelings, and you want to make sure that your reader's going to have the feelings that you want them to have. So being careful with negativity. A lot of these questions are asking you to reflect on a negative experience, but what they want to feel at the end is that you came out okay, right? That you learned and you grew from it. Not necessarily that you got it right, but that you learned from it. So that's really important. Voice and truth are supreme, so don't lose yourself in trying to make the essay really pretty. That tends to put up a veneer, and then readers aren't going to necessarily feel that they're connecting with you. They're going to feel like you're trying to impress them. So big SAT words, focusing more on the story instead of what you're actually like dialogue and fleshing it all out, and really capturing the moment. If you're not in that moment and they're not getting a strong sense of who you are, then you might not engage them, and they might not really feel that they know who you are. So I usually have this problem mostly with students that are quite good at writing, and they're just really bent on making their writing this work of art, and they often get lost in the art and lose sight of themselves. Some of the deadlines that you are all looking at now, I know that Mary was talking about the green sheet. I think it's still called that, right? The green sheet. It's the form that students and parents are filling out. So that's due usually in September. So in September, you're working on finalizing your personal statements, finalizing an additional statement, and then filling out this form for your counselor. There are rolling applications out there, especially with the state schools, and this is a great way to get admittance early. You can apply to schools that have a rolling deadline, and they generally turn their admissions results around in 4 weeks. So schools like University of Washington, University of Oregon, there's a whole bunch of state schools out there. So if that'll kind of help you to feel good, like, well, at least I know I'm going to college, which is absurd. Everybody's going to college, but I have so many students say to me, oh my gosh, am I going to go to college? Of course you're going to college. But they like that reassurance of knowing that they've got a college in their pocket that they're going to. So if that'll kind of help you in your process, you might consider applying early in September, October to some of these state schools. So you submit your CSU applications in October. I generally say do them as soon as you can. It's just an application. There's no essay. By November 1st, you're going to have the early action, early decisions coming out, and George will be talking more about those. Georgia Tech, this is just I know we have a lot of engineers in the Bay Area. Their early action deadline is October 15th. So if any of you are thinking about Georgia Tech, which you should, I really like it. It's a fun engineering school. Be sure to put that on your radar because that comes up pretty quickly. In November, and I would say by November 25th, submit your UC application. You do not want to do this over Thanksgiving. The server gets kind of bubby and things start to break, especially, that's also true of the Common App. You don't want to be submitting last minute. I can't tell you how many students that have called me in a panic because they've got the rainbow wheel spinning on their application and it's not going away, and they've got 3 computers open and they're trying to get in and they can't get in, and they're losing, years in the process. So don't let that be you. Don't apply last minute. It's not worth it. I've had students lose their applications and not be able to apply from applying late. December 15th is when early action, early decisions are released. I really like my students to have everything done by December 15th so that they can take a break, a 2-week break before they start up this semester again. But some people like to strategize and keep the schools that they're least interested in toward the end and write those essays during the winter break. So that kind of gives you an overview of what the deadlines look like. Organization is really personal, in my opinion. I am not a big Excel sheet fan, but a lot of people love Excel sheets. I like to use Google Docs because they have all of that in there. They've got, you can use documents, but you can also use Excel sheets. You can do, sometimes students like to do presentations just for themselves. They like to do something creative with the work that they're creating for their applications. So the Google Docs also allow you to share very easily with your teachers. A lot of students are going to be asked by their teachers to provide their essay for overview, or you might be working on your essay with a teacher right now. So Google Docs is a great way to share. It's advisable that you find somebody that you like and you trust that is going to give you advice that's pertinent to you, not pertinent to them and their ideas about what constitutes good writing, but helping you with your essay. Finding somebody that can read your essay like that is really great, so Google Docs is great for that. I'm going to just show you sort of a multi-file just to show you what students do in terms of organizing that. So this is Google Docs, right? And you've got students that have put in here their supplement essays for each of their schools. They've got their Common App essays in here, and then they might have, the student is not applying to the UCs, but they might have a UC file as well. And so that's just one way to be organized, and I think that works really well for students. You can put it all in a single file, but the files and the documents can make it look really sleek and easy to follow. Here's an Excel sheet, and everybody has different information on these. This Excel sheet includes the quality of life index, which is provided in many of the guides, the percentage of students that were admitted, if they're planning to visit or not, if they have interviews, and when they have to interview by. This is a huge, important aspect of this process. Please pay attention to the interviews. It can make a huge difference. It can make all the difference in your application. So there are deadlines. MIT's deadline for early action is actually like October 15th or something like that for an interview, even though their application was just launched at the end of August. So if there's anything you're going to do over the next week, find out if your school's interview and if they have interview deadlines. So these go on and on: financial aid, the cost of the school, when you have to apply by. I mean, you can create a super long Excel sheet. I have this task list that I use to work with students, and I'm happy to email this to you if anybody's interested in having it. So I have a sign-up sheet outside if you'd like it. I'm happy to make it available to everybody. And it's basically just deadlines, and then it has a task list of everything that you have to do in this process, including the interviews, but also sending your transcripts, making sure that they've gone out, making sure that your SAT scores or ACT scores, videos that you can look into, making sure that you've completed an additional statement if you have an athletic supplement or an art supplement. So it's all just, it's a big, long checklist, and that's what I use with my students. And I do, phone calls with them. So you could do that. You could have a meeting with your student. Students, I really recommend that you find a buddy and check in with each other and keep each other accountable. It's really powerful. And, it makes it fun, too, because you have somebody that's going to see you through the process. You're not going to be alone. So those are my kind of organization tips. I do know that I was at a family's house last night, and they had a big whiteboard up. So some families use whiteboards, and that's another way to stay organized and just put all of the dates of the different supplements that are due. And I generally organize students to do a school a week, starting now. Generally, they have like now through mid-November. Every week they have a supplement. If the supplement is particularly long, like Yale, I give them 2 weeks to get it done. It's not a lot of time. It means that they have to do it and revise it and get it back to me. So they usually go through 2 or 3 drafts. Those supplement questions have to be done well. For the schools, they're more important than the personal statement, because these are the questions that they want you to answer for them. So I think this is my last slide here. Inspiration, I've already said this. Find a buddy to keep you on track. Quit your desk. I highly believe in this. If you can not work at home, that's ideal. Try to find a space that you go to regularly that's outside of your home. When we go home, a lot of things happen to us psychologically and mentally, and our neurons fire in different ways. You don't want to get into a space of regularity and homework and drudgery. You really want to be in a place like, go sit out underneath a tree in your house and see what that feels like to write out there. Go to a cafe, find a friend and meet at a cafe, find a friend and go to the library, but try to get out of the spaces that you generally do homework in. This is not a homework assignment. And you really want the time to be kind of special, so make a date with yourself and, carve out the time to do something different. And then you can make that special too. Snacks, food is always great. Music, some students write really well to their favorite music. Pulling up quotes that inspire you or visuals, all of that can be really helpful. And I think that's my last slide. Did I do it? Is it 25 minutes, 30 minutes? Great. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Felicia. So now you know about the art of the essay, all the different deadlines you have ahead of yourself. You might be wondering, is there a science to all this college application? Is there any data that I can look at? Well, there is. So with that, we have, I want you to please welcome our next speaker, who is CEO and creator of the app College Kickstart, George Fan.
Well, thank you, Dory, and hello, everybody. It's nice to be back here at Saratoga again. Back in the summer of 2014, you all were instrumental in helping the business get going, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you all. So give me a second here just to set up a College Kickstart real quick, and we'll get rolling. All right. Okay, that should do it. Just by show of hands here, can you raise your hand if you're the parent of a senior or a senior? All right, and how many of you are going through the process for the first time? Many of you. You having fun? Well, that's the way I was a couple of years ago. I was born here in the United States, and I had the pleasure of experiencing modern-day college admissions with our eldest a couple of years back, and it was an eye-opener, right? You all probably used the typewriter as I did, applied to 3 or 4 schools, and to see kids applying to 12, 15, 20 schools, and to see these ridiculously low admission rates, it just makes you feel helpless. And with the internet and with the Common App, it's overwhelming as well. Just a little background on myself, right? My daughter and my son, they both attend public schools up in the East Bay. We're in Pleasanton. And obviously, as first-timers through the process, we were eager for information, right? But as you know, in California, counselors are well-meaning, but they're strapped for time. And so it was really hard to find the kind of support we needed. So really, we had 2 choices. One is to figure out ourselves and make the massive spreadsheet, right? Or to go and take out the checkbook and invest in consultants, right? And so we ended up doing a little bit of both, but it came away with from the process feeling like there had to be some middle ground, okay? Some way for folks like us to just kind of get your arms around the process without having to break the bank or having to go and research all kinds of data. And that really led to the genesis of College Kickstart. And while I'll show you College Kickstart tonight, really that's not my focus. My focus is on mobilizing to action, right? So what I'd like to do is focus more on the steps you can take from the time you have a list of schools in mind to do some really sound and sensible things to set yourself up for success and options come April. All right? So, simple college admissions cycle, right? Your kids, they've worked hard for the last several years, right? They've got their, grade point average, they've got test scores. Over the summer, they've researched a bunch of schools to figure out where there's good fit and opportunity to apply, right? Now what? Should you just apply? Well, we think not. Right, in this day and age, right, with single-digit admission rates, 100,000 people applying to UCLA, right, the pressure for kids to apply to tons and tons of schools to give them more chances for getting in, the stakes are high. And we think it's much better to look before you leap and have a plan, all right? And so by plan here, I'm going to use a little bit more of a stricter definition, right? I think Felicia was very good at sort of giving you an overview of the process. And if you don't know it already, college admissions is both art and science, right? No test scores you can get will guarantee you admission into an elite institution. No money you can pay for an expert will guarantee admission to the same place as well. It's a little bit of both. So the plan here that we're focused on, as Dory alluded to, is really more the science-y part to it, right? And what you can do as parents, right, to concretely improve the opportunity for your students, for your kids, all right? So what's in a great plan? All right, 3 things are in a great plan. First, you've got to bulletproof your list. All right, this is a really important way to create a foundation for success. The second thing you absolutely need to do is you need to look for ways to capitalize on early admission. Raise your hand if you know what early admission is. Okay, how many of you can tell me the difference between early decision, early action, restrictive early action? Okay, a little less of you, all right? How many of you can tell me if you apply to one school early decision, whether or not you can apply to another school restrictive early action? All right, so the concept is simple, apply early, hear back early, but it gets incredibly confusing to try to figure out how to make sense of it all, and more importantly, what to do with it with your college list. All right, so this is a very important part to the whole college plan that you absolutely need to be considering. The third piece is minimizing wasted motion, right? With so many applications and so many essays, right, as Felicia, you mentioned there, whatever you can do to try to avoid unnecessary work and cost, it's worth the time to do it, all right? So the short answer to the question of what to do, right, now that you've got your list, is to create a plan and to follow this path to creating the plan. All right? It lays a foundation for success, it enhances advantage, and it preserves sanity along the way. Let's illustrate some of these points in a little bit more detail. All right? So I would like to introduce you to John. John is a senior at Saratoga High School, and John has been thinking hard about his list, and he has decided that he is going to apply to 8 Ivy League schools with Cal as a safety. Okay? One problem with John is not a particularly strong student, all right? So this is an extreme example, right? But this is an example where it's clear that, you know, best intentions fit aspirations, it's not enough, okay? John's got to sort of reset his expectations because his list is not tuned to his academic credentials. That's a problem. All right? Now let me introduce you to Jack, John's twin. Jack has got the same aspirations for the schools, but Jack is an academic stud. All right? Great test scores, top of the class, perfect, perfect this and that. Is this a good list for Jack? No. Right? It's for different reasons. Certainly Jack has credentials, but so do the 30,000 other people who are applying to these schools. All right? The challenge for Jack is swinging for the fences, and he needs a better way to hedge his bets. All right? So these are extreme examples, right? But it's something that we see time and time again with the people we work with, right? In that you've got to make sure that your list is bulletproofed, okay? That you've got to make sure that you've got options come April, right? And it doesn't mean wishing for the best and letting things fly, all right? So how we go about bulletproofing a list is one of the things we'll cover shortly, all right? Second thing, early admission. As I mentioned, it's a well-known but ill-understood concept, right? Between the various flavors, their terms and conditions, and all that, it's a lot to get your arms around and to understand, much less exploit. But I'm also here to tell you that you absolutely have to invest the time in it, okay? So what I've got here is I've got a list of class of 19 data, so it's pretty fresh stuff. It's for a variety of schools, some very well-known, some liberal arts schools, some national universities, right? And what we do is we show, for each school, the overall admission rate, okay, the admission rate for applying early, okay, and the regular decision admission rate. All right? 2 important points to know here. First point is that there's a material advantage for getting in if you apply early. Okay, now I'm generalizing here. You've got to account for things like legacy athletes, underrepresented minorities, all sorts of things. But what you find is that the admission rate differences are material, okay? Too big to ignore. All right? Second thing that's important to know here is that by the time someone applies regular decision, nearly half the class has been spoken for. All right? Why is this? Well, because schools love it when there's no competition for students. And so if you're willing to raise your hand and say, I'm willing to commit if you accept me to school X, they love it, all right? They love it not only because they don't have to compete for you, but because something called their admission yield goes skyrocketing up, all right? And when your admission yield goes up, your prestige goes up, and your rankings go up, right? So for these two reasons, early admission has got to be something that you consider as part of your plan. It may not always be appropriate, but you have to consider it, all right? So that's the second thing you have to figure out in your plan. Third thing, right, is the point of sanity, right? So, I did my little check here. If you did 16 applications with some of the schools listed here, I counted 37 essays, right? And I counted over $1,000 in application fees, okay? And so it's a lot of work, right? And to overlay that on top of a crazy senior already, right, and to get it all sequenced, it's a lot of effort. So if there's anything you can do to work smarter, okay, to minimize unnecessary motion, it's all to your benefit, right? And that's really the other thing that we look for here in a college plan. The good news is that it actually is quite possible, especially with early admission, to find ways to organize the work to minimize working cost. All right? So let's put our ideas to work here. So we're going to take another case study. This is Jane, all right, and this is probably a little bit more of a realistic example. Jane is an A student, and she's got a 2060 SAT, top 10% of her class, and she's done her research, worked with her counselors, and determined that this list of schools are schools that are at the top of her list. So in rank order, Colorado College, Bowdoin, Georgetown, Boston College, Boston University, and Whitman. All right? So Jane she realizes that there's a lot at stake here, there's a lot of work to be done, so she decides, I'm going to go try to create a plan, right? So let's see how we can create a plan with her in College Kickstart. All right, so here's College Kickstart, right? And College Kickstart's designed to help students and families create sensible college plans, right? And so what we've done is I've gone ahead already and entered in Jane's academic profile information, right? I've also entered in her list of schools from the database of schools that we have offered, okay? The list is rank ordered in terms of interest, all right? And with that information, we can click on Run Kickstart just to get the plan going, okay? The first thing we see is sort of a snapshot of the findings. If you remember, there are three things in a plan: bulletproof the list, capitalize on early admission, and find ways to minimize wasted motion, right? Just at a glance here, and we'll dig through this in more detail, we see that the list that Jane put in gets a B-. It's slightly aggressive. Let's find out what that is all about. We also can see here that from an early admission perspective, two opportunities were found. And it turns out that for those two schools, you can boost your odds by over 50% if you compare the early rate to the regular decision rate. All right. Third thing, in terms of an action plan, we found a way to sequence the work. So it turns out of the 6 applications, the suggestion is do 2. You got to do 2 regardless, but then hang on for a little bit. And depending on what happens with those 2, you may be able to avoid doing the 4 later on, right? So let's dig into each of these, right, and talk about the methodology for how we get there. All right, so if we look at the list, right, and bulletproofing your list, we've got this grade, this B-, slightly aggressive. Well, what does that mean? Well, the first thing we do, right, is we categorize the schools. Safeties, targets, reaches, unlikelies, these terms sound familiar to you? Yes, no? They were a mystery to me, right? I would hear these terms like, well, what the heck is a safety school? What is a target school, right? But really what it is, it's a way to try to categorize the school based on how selective the institution is and how strong of a candidate you are, right? Your academic performance is the indicator for that, right? And so you can think of a safety school as a school where you have a pretty high probability of getting in, right? An unlikely school is the other extreme, right? John, in our case, is one who's probably very unlikely to get any of the schools on his list, right? And then targets and reaches are shades of gray in between. So the first thing you want to do is you want to categorize the schools into, in our case, we use safeties, targets, reaches, and unlikelies. But different people use different kinds of flavors. Some have more, some have less. Their definitions are different. All right. It's a bit like managing a portfolio for retirement, right? If you've got 20 years, before retirement, are you going to put all your money into Tesla? Maybe, right? But maybe you want to hedge your bets too, right? So it's the same sort of principle. All right. Once we've gone off and categorized the schools, right, then what we have to do is we have to sort of assess the overall mix, right? Are they all reaches? Are they all unlikelies? What's my mix? And we can see with Jane here that Jane has 3 targets, 3 reaches, no safeties, and no unlikelies, all right? So what we do is we ask ourselves, well, how is that, and what's sort of the standard that we want to work towards, right? And for us at College Kickstart, we recommend that you have at least 1 safety school, 3 to 5 targets, and 2 or more reaches, right? The safety and the targets are there so you've got a core group of schools that you can feel pretty confident that you'll be able to get into, right? And really, the most important thing is to make sure that you've got that sort of core list of schools in place, all right? The reach schools, some by definition are reaches because they're just really selective to begin with, but the reach schools give you upside, and so long as you've got your core in place, if you want to apply to 5, 10, reach schools, that's fine, right? But just make sure that you've got your core of safeties and targets in place, all right? So if we think about the process for bulletproofing the list, what we do is we categorize the schools. After we categorize the schools, we kind of assess the mix and figure out where there are places for improvement. In our situation here, what the system is saying is that it's slightly aggressive because we'd like you to add a safety school, all right? So for us, what we'll do is we'll click on the Find Safeties button, and then in College Kickstart, what we'll do is we'll go off and we'll look through our database, look through your academic credentials, look through the selectivity of all the schools, and figure out which of the schools in our database would represent safeties for you, targets for you, or reaches for you, okay? We also provide some filters to let you filter things on size or setting or region, and some special filters as well. It could be small class sizes, great merit aid, meets full demonstrated need. Brian Safin suggested one that I put in, which is no extra common app essays. Right, so we can do that. So let's say for Jane here, we'll say, okay, well, we need a safety. I want to avoid an extra essay. I want some small class sizes. And College of Atlantic sounds good. Jane will do some research on it. She'll talk to her counselors, say, okay, yeah, this makes sense. This looks like a good fit. So we'll add it, and then we'll run Kickstart again. All right, so we can see here that the list check has changed from a B- to an A, right? So don't worry about the grades. It's the process that counts, right? What you want to do is make sure that you create a list, right, that is bulletproof and will lead to options no matter what the admissions god says, right? All right, and so great if you get into Harvard, but what if you don't, all right? You want to make sure that you've got options that you can fall back on and feel good about. That's the whole goal of the bulletproof list. All right, so once we've got that in place, the next thing now is to capitalize on early admission, all right? So what we see here, okay, is that we see on the right side, and sorry, the resolution's a little bit off here, but we see on the right side, there's a list of schools. And anywhere you see green, it's a place where an early admission opportunity has been identified, okay? So how do we go about doing this? Well, number one, we ask you to rank your list in order of interest so we kind of know where priorities are, right? The second thing we do is we go track all that gory data, right, that tells us about what options are offered by each school, what the admission rates are, what the terms and conditions are, and then we work our way top down through the list to figure out what's appropriate for you, all right? In this case, for Jane, it looks like there's an early action opportunity at Colorado College that's worth pursuing, as well as a restrictive early action option at Boston College worth pursuing. At Colorado College, by applying early action, the admission rate moves up about 80% to 22%. Still competitive, but far better than applying regular decision. And then at BC, the admission rate moves up about 30% to 41%, okay? So this is a way that one can take advantage of early admission in a way that's appropriate to the user, okay? Now one thing I think it's important to mention here is that how strongly you feel about a school dictates what the possibilities are, all right? Let me give you a concrete example of that. So Jane, in this case here, Jane, let's just say she hadn't visited any of the schools yet, right? And so she didn't want to commit to anything. Now let's say a month goes by, she visits Colorado College and says, oh man, I love the mountains, I love the block plan, this is the place for me, right? And I would go. In that case there, what you can do is you can click on the button here that says, I'm sure I'd attend, okay? And what that does is it tells College Kickstart, oh, okay, someone is really willing to commit, right? And in that case, now we can start to open up the options to options that are binding, namely early decision. All right, so let's see what happens if I click on this and run College Kickstart again. Okay, we can see something has changed here. We see that Colorado College now has turned from early action to early decision, okay? And the reason why it's done that is because Jane has indicated that she's really committed to attending the school. Okay, we can also see that because she applied to Colorado College early decision, that Boston College is no longer restrictive early action, right? This is the T's and C's that I've referred to before, right? And keeping track of what you can do in this situation, that situation, that's one of the things that College Kickstart can take care of for you very easily. So all you have to do is focus on what schools are important to me, in what order, and how much do I really like them. All right? So this process of understanding what options are available at each of the schools and trying to figure out from top to bottom what are the appropriate early admission options that you should avail yourself to is how we go about figuring out how to capitalize on early admission. All right? The last piece is minimizing wasted motion, right? And so what we do is now that we know the list of schools, now we know how you're applying, we can start to figure out due dates and notification dates and try to figure out how to set things up so that you can minimize work and cost, right? And so what happens here? Well, we can see here that what the system is recommending, this is a simple case here, is that, you know what? You should apply to Colorado College first, ED1, right? And depending on the results there, okay, you may be able to be done, right? Or you'll have to go out and fill out the applications you'd have to do anyway, right? And, if we change this back, let me change this to another scenario. I think it'll be as interesting. Let's say I'll go back to the original one. We can see here that because BC is an option 2, that you should apply to them first and wait to see what happens. Right now, BC is in the middle of the list, but the good news is that if you get in there, then the schools lower ranked on the list no longer have to be done, right? So early admission, okay, is really valuable for 2 reasons. One is because it can help you with odds, right? But the other reason is because you can use it to actually minimize work and cost, right, if you're admitted to your early admission school. Right, so it's another really valuable asset to have, and a reason why this needs to be part of your plan. Okay? So let's go on back here, right, and let me just summarize what we've done, right? So we've created a college plan, right? First thing we did was we bulletproofed the list. Okay, we did it because we want to make sure we've got a foundation for success, right, that can withstand whatever the admission gods throw at you. We did it by categorizing schools. We assessed the mix, we figured out what actions need to be taken, we took corrective action. All right? For Jane, it resulted in a stronger list. The list moved from a B- to an A, and we did it because we added a safety school to improve the overall strength of her list. Second thing we did was we looked for early admission opportunities, right? And to do that, we ranked the schools, we understood the options, and selected the appropriate plans, taking care to understand what the terms and conditions are of the various plans that are offered and the interactions with each other. All right? For Jane, it resulted in a couple of opportunities found and a boost in odds for those schools. Finally, in terms of minimizing wasted motion, right, we gathered due dates, notification dates, all right, and we figured out sort of the must-do versus the might-avoid buckets, and placed the schools into each of those buckets and acted accordingly, right? And so for Jane, this represents the potential, if she's admitted to a highest ranked school, to avoid a couple of apps and save mom and dad a couple $100s in the process. All right, so it makes a difference, not just for Jane, right? I'm showing you some results from the beta test we did that Saratoga High was quite an active part of in the summer of 2014. It turns out for the public and private schools that we work with and the students there, these are students who typically had a B or better, a grade, a point average. Turns out that We found opportunities to improve the list over 90% of the time, okay? And care to guess what percentage of those were lists that were too aggressive? It's over 90%, okay? Okay, so it's an important thing to do to make sure you don't make the egregious error, right? Because an error of not applying to a balanced list of schools is an error that you can correct, and it would be a shame to make, all right? Second thing is early admission, right? Turns out that on average, we're able to find 2 early admission opportunities for over 90% of the students on the list, all right? And finally, for work and cost, we're able to find opportunities over 80% of the time for students and save mom and dad $280 in the process, and the student 4 applications if they're admitted to the highest ranked school. All right, so it makes a difference, and obviously if all you're doing is applying to UC schools, there's no way to save on the action plan, right, or early admission, but nonetheless, it's something that has broader ramifications than just this one instance with Jane. All right, so important to keep this in perspective, right? Admissions is art and science, right? And so there are certain things that you have to always remember, right? No test score is going to guarantee admission to an elite school. No consultant is going to be able to guarantee admission to a great school either, right? And so it's this balance of the two. The thing that I think is useful with College Kickstart is one of those things that you as families can control, right? Fit and finish, these things, it's important to speak to the experts about and to consult them on, right? But something like tracking schools, understand the implications of a list on early admission opportunities, on the quality of the list, on the action plan. I think all those things are things that we as parents and students can handle with ease, right? And so I think it's also important to mention that the tool that we use here is driven by data, right? And so it's driven by your academic credentials, right? SAT, GPA, rank, things like that. And so obviously, people are more than numbers, right? But academic credentials are an important first filter, right? And therefore, we think that this is a very effective way to be used as a directional guidance tool as opposed to, the crystal ball that predicts where you will be when, right? That's not exactly not what we're trying to do. All right, so just think of this as a sanity check, and it's a great way to prepare for the conversation with someone on Brian Safine's team or an outside consultant you work with, and I think you'll find it a way to be more productive with those people as well. All right, so I've got a list of schools in mind. Now what, right? So the answer to the question is, don't just apply, make a plan. All right, look before you leap. You've got one chance to get it right. So make sure you do it, and you've got options come April, right? And the 3 steps that I'd like you to take away from this whole thing is the 3 steps to make that happen is to bulletproof your list, is to capitalize on early admission, and to minimize the wasted motion. I'd also encourage you, we have a very active blog and newsletter, so come visit our site, sign up for it, and what we'll do is we'll keep you posted on all sorts of really important information like early admission rates, overall admission rates, hints and tips on deadlines for programs, things like that. So it tends to be a very useful source of information for you as you're going through the process. All right, with that, thank you very much.
So the next part of our evening is we're going to do a short Q&A. And so any questions that you might have, Sandy and Joanne are handing out index cards for you because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So we're going to spend about, both speakers are going to come up and they're going to answer questions that you might have. And if you want to speak to them afterwards about a little more personal questions, you're welcome to do that as well. But before we do our questions and answers, I just want to give a round of applause to Dr. Fahey and George Fan for coming tonight and hopefully helping you sort everything out. And they're going to take turns with your questions that you might have. Thank you. Do we have pencils as well? Great. Again, just to get an idea, how many parents of seniors are out there? Can I get your hands? Okay. Well, you have Labor Day weekend that get started on your list with your child. This is my third time going through it, so we'll see what happens. It's always interesting.
Answer these questions?
Certainly.
Yeah, okay. So the first question here is, do colleges really read essays? And I do think that that's a good question. And the reason for that is that I think that schools have to conquer and divide, and so sometimes they're really admitting students on their quantitative scores. The smaller the school, the more often that they actually are reading the essays very carefully. They also want to make sure of who they're admitting, and so they are looking for red flags in these application process and making sure that they're not admitting students that they fear might be a hazard to other students. One of the reasons that you're asked, tell us about your experience of diversity, is that they really want to make sure that they know who they're admitting, and so the essays is one way for them to figure that out. But I think that how well are they reading the essays? I think that might be a better question. I think in some cases, they're reading them very quickly, and in other cases, 3 people are taking a look at them. I know people that read for the UCs. They read them. They read them and they evaluate them and they give them numbers. So they are being read even at the largest universities, and certainly at the smaller schools, of which there are many more. They're definitely paying very close attention to the quality of the student that they're admitting. The other question was, please give a few examples of essay topics that are mistakes. I heard sports and travel. You know, those are really, I mean, there's essays, there are articles out there that are written about the travel essays and how many of those travel essays they get. So and they kind of break into genre. One is that I went to a poor country and helped the poor people and realized how privileged I am and how lucky I am to have grown up the way that I did. You know, I say this in a very empathetic way because I think these are young people that are out in the world for the first time, and it's a lot to kind of deal with these world differences. So I have a lot of empathy for students, and I kind of try to help them to understand where that essay might really rub someone the wrong way. But admissions can be really annoyed by these essays just because they get so many. And they're very sensitive to privilege and entitlement, and they're also very sensitive to a sort of boasting that doesn't show a certain amount of, I don't want to say humility, but they want to see that you're also humble and that you care for others. So really just being arrogant or privileged or acting entitled in an essay is definitely something that admissions is very sensitive to. Again, I would say that sports and travel are really, those are the ones that, and then telling a story about having to learn piano at the age of 4, try to drill in on something else. That's just also a very generic story. So those are the main ones, though.
Want to take a break and let George try?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have 2 questions here. One is, can applying early decision backfire for a 2.8 GPA student? It's a great question, right? And so the way I would answer it is yes. That what's important in early decision is that I think it's important to know that early decision will never make a weak applicant stronger. Okay, you're usually competing with a pool of fairly qualified applicants, and so you have to kind of take a look, and if your credentials put you in the bottom quartile of students, then it's something you want to think a little bit twice about. The second question is there a wait list for early decision students who are not admitted early decision? Different schools handle this differently, but it's not really a wait list. What ends up happening is that one of 3 things will be happening. One is you're accepted, right? The other is that you are deferred, right? And when you get deferred, that means you move not into another early decision pool, you move into the regular decision pool, right? Where you'll be evaluated with everybody else, right? The third thing is that there's still the possibility of an outright rejection as well, all right? So those are the ways that an early decision gets made, and there is no wait list to speak of on that front. Okay.
There's a quick one about, I mentioned about the September the 15th deadline. There are these private college packets that your student has to pay $20 to get the packet. 2 of those, one half of that set is due for private colleges if you want to do early action. So now that you understand a bit more about what early action is, if you have, which all of us probably have in the list of your students, you probably have 1 or 2 schools at least that have early action. And if you do, you need to get into your college, into the guidance counselor that for your child. You need to turn in these white packets. There's a set of yellow packets that are due in late October or something like that, a further date, mid-October maybe. I haven't memorized that one because the September 15th is looming. So you need to get everything into that packet, which is recommendation, figuring out which teachers are going to come up with recommendations for you, figuring out having your parents write your essay about you personally that the guidance counselor at Saratoga High is going to use to write their letter of recommendation for you. And yeah, so I hope that answers it. If not, see me later.
Okay, so I'm going to fire through these. Where should my senior be in the college app process right now? Should they have a list or an essay? So you're going to have to tell your counselor this month where you're going to apply. So your list really needs to be pretty solid by now, and you can add a few more before you have to, or take one off before you have to hand that to your counselor. So your counselor's department, they have the deadline. And after you've done that, most schools, most high schools do not want you adding. You can drop a school, but you can't add. So there's a strict deadline on that. The essay, ideally, you want to be in a next to final state. Students are revising their essay in October and November, sometimes in conjunction with their teachers, but you really want to be pretty solid at this point about what you're going to write about. That said, I have students all the time that have finished their essay at this point, and they decide they want to write about something else, and they get really inspired. So students have their own natural process throughout this whole thing, and you just don't know when they're all of a sudden going to say, I don't like that essay, I'm going to start a new one, and they write something that's much more reflective of their sort of creative spirit. So that first essay wasn't a waste. They can sometimes put it in their additional statement, but it's often an exercise in sort of getting familiar with the genre and then really letting loose. Like they've got something, they're safe, and then they can kind of let loose. So I would say don't pressure your students to say, oh, I went and listened to Felicia Fahey, she said your essay should be done now. They will come to this on their own. They do have their natural process, so try to kind of go easy on them and let them do it when they're ready. I'm kind of giving you contradictory messages, I realize that, but if they haven't done it yet, don't worry too much. They're going to start feeling that pressure from their peers, and they'll do it on their own. The essay prompts available, are they available during the summer? So both the UCs and the Common App tend to announce their essay topics in January of the year prior. So Common App always does. So you can look for that like in the New York Times and in most newspapers. Common App says these are going to be our prompts for the following year. UC application goes live August 1st. And I think they will make it very clear in the news if they're going to be changing their prompts. You can always check the UC admissions UC admissions page and just see if they're changing their prompts, but they will make it clear. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process for them to change their application prompts. When are the interviews? Are they after the application deadlines? Great question. They vary. Some of them are now. You have to do them in the next couple months. USC, it's a first come, first serve. So you do want to be looking at them now and signing up to get an interview now rather than waiting when they might have filled up or when the deadline might have passed. So this is, as I said before, it's a really good time to look into that. Sometimes they are in January, February. And sometimes their deadlines depend on whether you're going early decision 1, early decision 2, early action. So you just need to look at each of those. Does it hurt to apply with undecided major? Is it better to apply with a major you're strong in and then change your major? All colleges and universities know that students change dramatically once they get to college, that their major is not necessarily a guarantee. The only decision that is very important is what college you're applying to. So if you're applying engineering, you're in engineering if you get admitted. If you think you want to be engineering, but you're not totally sure, that's something that you kind of have to figure out in this process. You could apply to some schools non-engineering and some schools engineering, and then you can kind of make a choice at the end. If you're going into other programs, I mean, those are the main programs. There's the College of Natural Sciences at Berkeley. So it just depends. You have to choose your college, but your major can change. You don't need to have any worry about that, unless it's engineering. So if you're going to be an engineer, you need to let them know why. They will ask you what you're interested in, and you should talk about your many interests. And it's okay if you're interested in everything. You can talk about that. So that's okay. Let's see. Common App. Do you respond to all prompts? No, you don't. You choose one. And you pretty much want to stick with that. I mean, you can try out different essay prompts and see if you like one better than the other, but you just write one essay on one prompt for the Common App. Tell us more about the parent letter for private school applications. So I'm assuming that this means the parent writing for the counselor, is that right? This is the person in the audience that asked that question. Generally, parents do not write something for the colleges.
This is specific to Saratoga High School. It will not go to the colleges at all, but our guidance counselors have to write so many letters of recommendations for every one of their students that's a senior, that they don't know every student and like anecdotes about every student that are available to them. So they ask us, Saratoga High is kind of known for asking for more information to weigh in with the guidance counselors writing that letter of recommendation than other high schools in the area. But we don't have much choice in whether or not that's too much or not. We just have to submit it. So, so you do have to write this personal parent letter, but it will never go to the colleges. And the green sheets that were alluded to, it's where you give 2 green sheets to teachers that are not going, well, actually, come to the senior guidance night, and Mr. Safina and his staff explain every single piece of paper in that whole process to you. So that's next.
Great. So I have a couple of quick questions here. One of them was, how often is the data updated for College Kickstart? And actually brings up a good comment here. You know, the guidebooks you look at, right, the stuff that's in paper, you have to be very careful about because the data is woefully out of date. Okay, and schools are getting very marketing savvy now, right? So anybody care to guess how much the applications grew last year at Bucknell? 39%. Okay, that will do something to an admission rate, right? Or at Swarthmore, it went up 40-some-odd%. So it's important that you try to track with the latest information, and sometimes that requires doing a little bit of research on your front to find out class of 2019 data or the class of 2018 data, right? So we at College Kickstart, we're always tracking this stuff, and between the common data set and other sources and press releases, we're trying to keep up with the latest and greatest. One question is how to determine the target schools for my student. And just in the interest of time, I had chosen to gloss over it, but I think it does warrant one definition of what a target school is and how to figure out how to, categorize a school in such fashion. So I'll take a minute here and just show you very quickly. In Jane's case, what we do is we categorize schools based on 2 things. One is admissions selectivity, right, their admission rates for the school, and as well as your academic performance relative to their entering class, right? And so what we'll do is we'll go off and look at, Adrian, I don't know if the screen is supposed to go on or. Okay, very good. All right, so what we do is we look at admission selectivity, right? So what you can see here is you can see for all the schools what the admission rates are. And what we do is we bucket them into 3 buckets, all right? One is very selective schools that admit 25% or less of students, less selective schools that admit more than 50% of students, and selective schools, which are in the middle, all right? In the same way, we look at the academic profile information you give, and we compare it to what the school reports, and we try to figure out, does that put you in the bottom quartile, top quartile, or mid quartile of the class, all right? So the question was, how do you define a target school? So what we do is we sort of take these, 2 dimensions here and create a matrix, right? And sorry, this is a little bit wonky, right? But what we'll do is we'll go on and we'll try to figure out whether or not you're safety, target, or reach based on where you fall along both of those dimensions. So for example, if a school admits more than 50% of students and the student is in the top quartile of the entering class, that's a safety school for us, right? A target school is a place where, and this is this blue button, this blue space here, the Boston College, Boston University, Whitman page. So what we do is we look for schools that admit a fair number of students. They're not super selective, and that we look for places where your academic performance puts you at least in the mid-50th percentile of students. For reach schools are either schools that are just plain selective, right? It doesn't matter how strong you are. If you're trying to apply to Stanford, it's always a reach, right? Or schools that admit a lot of students, but schools where your academic performance is a little bit weaker, and these are the light blue areas. So to answer your question, a target school for us is a school that admits 25% or more of their students, and where your student is, in the mid-50th percentile or better academically. All right. The last question is, how does athletics, sports, and sports enter the equation? And I think this is a broader question and another excellent question. All right. So if you have a special talent or a hook, okay, those are things that can make a difference, right? I interview for my alma mater, MIT, and so when I see someone who's a Westinghouse scholar or someone who's got a particular aptitude for sport, those things are noted because it helps to enhance the diversity of the population, right? And so those things are things that you do want to factor in. Something like what we do has no way of factoring that into the admissions equation, and that's where I'd encourage you to reach out to your counselor or consultant to figure out what the actual impact is likely to be. Okay.
I just want to talk quickly back about this, what parents should be writing for their counselors. The same advice applies to you that I'm giving to the students. Be detailed. Don't say anything that you could say about a friend's student. So hardworking, determined, persistent, those words are completely worn out. So you need to drill in. Think about who your student is, who they've always been. Every student here has come into the world with certain characteristics, and that's the kind of information that's really helpful. So stories, anecdotes really help. Try not to overwrite these things because these counselors are writing lots of these forms, and you can really help them out if you keep it concise and use bullet points. At least that's what I've heard from counselors everywhere. Are UC and the UC1 and UC prompts related? Do you need to connect them? Not at all. They're totally disjointed. They're trying to get at what you like about yourself and who you are in your community or where you come from. So those are really different, and they don't need to be connected or interwoven in any way. There's a personal question here about if I'm working with students from Saratoga. I do. I'm happy to speak with this person afterwards. Could you talk about teachers' recommendation letters for students, how to choose which teacher, and what grade should they have had the student in? This is an excellent question. Generally speaking, they want to see a letter from someone that you've had in your junior year. That's the year that they're most paying attention to, and ideally that they're having again repeated in the fall of the senior year, so that they're writing about the student again. That's pretty uncommon. So mainly you want somebody where you did really well in their course. They are being asked to put you in the percentile groups of the top 5, the top 1%, the top 10, 20, and bottom 50 percentile. So you want it to pick a teacher that thinks the world of you and thinks that you've done really well in a class that you've done really well in, because you want to have one of the best letters from this teacher. So that's really important. Obviously, if a teacher knows you personally, that also really helps a lot. But it's got to be in the classes that you've done the best in. Should a strong test taker take both the ACT and SAT? I don't really believe in that. I also believe in being really efficient in this process and not strategizing so that you're not overworking. There's a lot of anxiety that comes up around the exams. I'm highly recommending that students take the ACT first. My experience has been that students do better on that exam, and because they are weighed equally, it doesn't make sense to take an exam that is harder for most students. The SAT requires prep for everybody. There are very few students that can go in and nail it. I know a lot of students that do very well on the ACT in their first try, or at least they take it once, they get familiar with it, and then they get like a 33, 34 on the second round. So I highly recommend taking a very strong look at the ACT. SAT is in flux. It's going to be changing. They've got a new exam. It's not tested. Study centers are trying to figure out how to prep it, so it's a little messy. And I think that's it.
I didn't realize I got another question about that private college packet. You only need one. You list the different colleges for each of the things. There's about room for, I don't know, 10?
Oh, more than that.
10, 15 on a page, so you're good. Just one packet.
So there was one little question also about the Common App prompts, and you can find them on our own Saratoga High School guidance website. Well, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. If you have more questions and you'd like to meet separately with our speakers, you're welcome to do that. Enjoy the long weekend, and thank you again for coming.